Hey everybody, I just wanted to run through some cool things under the premise of mastering Chrome DevTools. So hopefully there's going to be a couple of things that you have not seen before, didn't know you could do with the DevTools, and I'm just going to kind of go through panel by panel and show some cool stuff. So first of all, I'm John Cooperman. I'm jcoop on all the things like Twitter and GitHub and all that. And then for some of this video, I'm going to be using a little web app that I made. Just a really simple site to help me demonstrate some of the DevTools stuff. So if you're interested in following along, you can find it at my GitHub, which is github.com/jcoop, and then find Mastering Chrome DevTools. It's just a really basic Node site. Cool, so before we get started with the DevTools stuff, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. One is using Chrome Canary. The DevTools team is always working on really cool stuff. And often the best way to stay up to date with all the great features that they're releasing is to download Chrome Canary, which will just sit on your computer as a separate application. It's pretty cool. You get all the bleeding edge stuff and a bunch of really cool dev tools. Second, on the same note, to stay up to date with all the cool things, before features are kind of green lighted for production, for stable readiness, they're often put in experiments. So if you want, you can check out all the cool experiments by going to chrome://flags. And so you go ahead to this page and you can just do a search with like Command F or whatever for DevTools, and you'll see this Developer Tools experiment. So you can go ahead and enable that. It requires a restart. And then as soon as this loads back up, I'll show you what we get from that. Okay, so now if I open up the DevTools, which I do with Command-Option-I, and I go here to these three dots and I click on settings, there's a new tab over here which is experiments. So this is pretty cool. They're always changing. They add some really cool ones. They've got like this promise inspector, some async stuff, accessibility stuff, color schemes. It's like really cool. So I would definitely recommend checking those out and just kind of playing around with them. So we got Canary, we got experiments turned on, should be ready to go. So I'm going to hop over to this site, which is just the one from my GitHub over here. And the first thing I wanted to do is pop open the DevTools and go to the Elements panel. So there's a lot going on here. For those that aren't familiar, the basic premise is we've got, Chrome DevTools basically takes in all the HTML from a website and it outputs this DOM that you can kind of interact with. So this is kind of a way to like visualize the actual document object model. So you can kind of click on things, you can change things around, you can like double click into a tag if you wanted to change it. Get in there. There we go. So I could change like this nav to a li or something like that. Anyway, so that's pretty cool. And then on the, let me change that back. On the other side, we've got basically the styles that are affecting whatever's selected. So if we select this container, we can see the styles affecting it. So there's some cool things here. One of them, I'm actually going to move away from this site for a second and go back to Twitter. So I'm logged in just as another account right now. So basically what you have, and what I have happen to me pretty often, is that I'll find something in the element inspector, but I don't know exactly where it is in the page. So let's say I right click on this tweet and I inspect. So at this point I'll have the actual tweet. Let me just scroll up a little bit right here. This item is the div class tweet. I've got it selected, but let's say I got that through some kind of search in the console or something like that. So I can hover over it, and Chrome, you'll see like over here, is smart enough to tell me that it's down. You can see this like arrow points down. But it's pretty tedious to like scroll through and keep checking to see where it is. So what you can do is you can right click on any item in the Elements tab, and you can click Scroll into View. And that'll actually scroll your viewport down, so now the tweet or whatever it is that you're looking for is in view. I use that one a lot on big pages like Twitter. It's really helpful. Another thing that I wanted to show is whenever you've got any of these elements hit, you can hit the H key on your keyboard and it'll hide the element. So it'll do like a display none, so it'll still keep its box model, but you can show and hide elements just by hitting H on them. And you can see here Web Inspector adds this like little class hide shortcut. So that's pretty cool. I use that a lot when doing design stuff. Another thing that's really great with big applications like Twitter is if you're looking at all these different styles and you're like trying to figure out where the border comes from. Sometimes it gets really tedious because you'll see like, these are being crossed out because they're being overridden by something else and you're kind of scrolling through. So one thing that's always really good to check out over here is this Computed Styles tab. So that'll kind of go through and it'll remove all of the crossed out overridden things and just show you what's really coming through. And what's really neat about it is if you find like, okay, here's where the border color is coming from, you can click on it, here, so the arrow, and it'll take you back to the Styles tab, and it'll show you the exact selector that's editing it. So that's great with like big CSS projects. I really like that a lot. Another thing that's pretty cool, we're going to get into breakpoints and step-through debugging in a bit, but for those that aren't familiar, the idea is basically you like click a line in your code and you tell the debugger, if you ever parse this line, pause for me, throw an exception, pause, let me see what's going on at that state and time. But what I've noticed a lot is when you start on a new project and you're not super familiar with what's going on, it's really like sometimes you'll get a bug filed and you really have no idea where in the code any of that is being triggered. So what's cool is you can take kind of the opposite approach to breakpoints with Chrome DevTools. So let's say that I got a bug filed and it's something to do with clicking the like button on one of these tweets. And I have no idea where the JavaScript is for clicking the like button, right? We've got this like huge code base. So what you can do is you can, right click and inspect element on the tweet, make sure we've got it. And then you can right click in the Elements tab and you've got this break on here. So you can tell Chrome DevTools to break when something happens to the actual front end as opposed to the the back end, the JavaScript code. And the three choices you have are when anything in the elements subtree is modified, any of the elements attributes are modified, or the node itself is removed. So this is really helpful, like if you get a bug that's like, hey, whenever I delete my to-do item, something goes wrong, and you're like, oh, I have no idea where the code is to delete to-do items, you can click node removal. For now, though, I'm going to click subtree modifications because that like button is part of the subtree of this tweet. So now I've got that breakpoint set, and I go ahead and click like. Oh no, hold on one second. I thought it was a subtree. Maybe it's not. Let me try it. Let me try a little bit of a different example here. So let me go to this footer and break on subtree modifications. Oh, that is just not working. All right, there we go. So it's a little bit particular with like maybe those buttons are outside of the tree itself, but you can see when I go to click on settings here, it does throw a breakpoint and it pauses in the debugger. And from that point I can go ahead, and we'll cover this later, but I can print out the code, which takes a second with these big JavaScript files, and I can see right here like this prepend function is getting called, and I can see a full call stack of like something triggered the open drop down and then prepend got called, and you can kind of walk through the code and see what's going on. So I use that one a bunch. Another thing that's really cool that you can do, I'm going to go ahead and find these breakpoints, and I'm going to remove them like this, and then I'm going to hit play through. So another thing that you can do that's really cool is you can force an element state. So if you're doing any kind of design work and you want to like change the way something looks when it's hovered on or something like that, you can go to the button, you can go to styles, and then you can click on this toggle element state. It's :HOV in Canary. I think it's like a little thumbtack pointing down in Chrome Stable. But anyway, you can do things like you can force a hover state. This one's tricky, right, because you have to actually hover on the thing that has the event listener. So it looks like that this button does not have the event listener, so maybe I'll go up a step to this div and add it here. There you go. So now you can see what it's like when it's hovered. You can see if there's a visited thing. You can see what it's like when it's focused on, active, all those kind of things. So that's pretty cool for doing design work, as opposed to like trying to like actually hover and then make changes and then hover again. You can just keep it hovered as you change things around. Another thing that's great that they just added recently, I like a lot. So if you find, let's go back to the hover, and now we can see that something in here is this pink. Let's try to find it. Here it is. Okay, so this color pink is being generated. So you can go ahead and you can click on the box itself, and it opens up this really nice little modal here. And there's a couple of things you can do. Let me just make this a bit bigger. So there's a couple of cool things you can do here. One of them is you can kind of drag the color around. If we scroll down this, you can see like what it would look like as we go to like you can see that 4 kind of changing in there. I think the container also has a separate one. Let's see. Something's still pink here. Anyway, so you can see kind of like, what things would look like as you change colors around, which is really nice. But the things that have been added recently, which are really cool, is this little picker here, which can change the color format. So you can have HSLA, hex, RGB, things like that. You can also do that from this screen. Find my green thing here. From here by just shift clicking on these elements. So you shift click on the box and it changes the color format for you, which is pretty sweet. And then another thing that they added, which I love a lot, is these color palettes. So you can see here we've kind of got this preloaded color palette. So your options are, you can use Google's material design color scheme, which is really nice. This is like often how I just build sites these days. I'll just kind of click around on the material design colors, and you can long press on one and see like the whole, all the different fades from light to dark of each color. But the thing that I use more often at work is you can actually click here and pull from the page colors. So now you can see I have this like perfect Twitter palette where I have, like the green we use, I have the, pink we use for the like, all those different things. So that's really helpful. You don't have to go back looking up hex codes or anything like that. You can just pull the page colors down and then mess around with them there. So I think that's about it I wanted to show for elements. There's some other really cool things, but those are kind of the main ones. So moving on to the network tab, I guess one other thing I should mention is in Canary and soon coming to stable, these tabs are draggable. And that's pretty neat, and on top of that, the changes that you make persist to disk. So you can kind of arrange them in whatever order you would like, and then every time you open Chrome DevTools, they'll stay in that order. Okay, so back on the network tab, for those that don't know, the basic concept is that it gives you kind of this waterfall of all the page assets as they load. So I guess let me just go ahead. I'm going to do a refresh to capture one, but before we do that, it's worth noting that there's this disable cache button here. That's really important. So basically it's telling the browser only when DevTools is open, don't cache any of these assets. Pull them all as though you're hitting the page for the first time. So always have that selected if you're doing debug work. I just leave it selected all the time because your caching will work just fine when DevTools is closed. So I'm going to go ahead and do a refresh here. And there's a couple of different really cool things. I know it's a lot of information. So basically one of the newer things that's come to DevTools is this camcorder up here. And so what this will do is it'll capture screenshots every time the page does a repaint. The only bummer with it is it only captures screenshots of the visible viewport that you've left. So in this case, like just this like 300 pixels of room up here. So usually if I'm really intent on the screenshots, I'll pop the DevTools out by clicking here and clicking, pop out into a separate window. That way I'll get the full page render. The screenshots are pretty cool. If you double click on them, you can kind of see what comes first. So for Twitter, it's like all the text comes first, and then the avatars and background images load in, and then the viewport is forced to scroll back to the position that it had, and then you can see kind of last then the notification come in. So that's pretty cool. Like one thing that I would do when auditing a site is look at like the initial screenshots and make sure that there's something for the user to do. Like in this case, the user can go ahead and read all of the text, which is great. They might not be able to see the avatar pictures, but I think that's the proper order. If you had a page where it was just loading the background image and then eventually loading the content, I'd go in and probably switch those things around. The next thing that you'll see is this visualization of the waterfall, and it's all color coded, so you can see like the big document comes in and then it starts loading all of these different assets and things like that. And the colors, this is basically a mile high view of what's represented down here. So if we go and we click on any one of them, or I think even hover, it'll show you what the colors mean. So the colors are like request sent, how long it had to wait, and how long the content took to download. So basically using these different colors analysis, you can kind of see where your bottlenecks are. Like, is the backend taking a long time to send assets? Or is there a problem where you're sending too many HTTP requests and they're just kind of stalled out waiting for their turn to go? Or is your content just too big and it's taking a really long time to download? So you can kind of get an idea of what's going on here, which is pretty cool. Another thing that's nice you can do, there's all these different pieces of information. So you can see like, did any assets come back bad or are they all okay? What type they are, who initiated them. And a cool way of visualizing this is kind of an Easter egg, is you can hold shift over any asset. And so if you go to the document and you hold shift, you'll see that in red, the things that what you're currently hovering on called. So the document called that CSS. And likewise, if you hover over one in green, you'll see what called it. So you can see that the CSS and this CSS and these were all called by the document, which is kind of a way of visualizing this here. So like the document itself does not have an initiator because that's what you actually request. And then everything else you can start seeing it, this is requested by index. Same with all these. And then as we get maybe down a little bit more, It looks like basically everything here is just requested by index. But if you have JavaScript that's like loading other JavaScript or whatever, you'd see that here. Another great thing is device emulation. And so basically it's a little blue phone in Chrome Stable, but it's these two, a phone and a tablet in Canary. So basically you can emulate all these different devices, like different phones, different resolutions, and then you can choose how big or small you zoom in. So this would be like a tablet or like some type of responsive web tester where you can move things around, but you can also see like what would it look like if I visited it on an iPhone 6. And then when you refresh, one thing to keep in mind is this actually sends, all of the headers as though it were an iPhone. So when you hit a site like Twitter with the iPhone header, you're actually going to get redirected to mobile.twitter.com. So it's just something to keep in mind that you're actually sending those mobile headers. It's not just a viewport change. So I'll take it back to responsive, hit twitter.com again. Cool. And then we can click on the phones again and it turns off device emulation mode. Well, I got stuck on mobile. There we go. Okay. Another thing that goes hand in hand with device emulation is network throttling. So I think this is really important because I think a lot of us tend to build sites as though they're only going to be used by people with really fast internet connections and really powerful computers. And so one of the things that you'll see these sites that are serving so many assets and so slowly that they load fine if you're in a city on, really fast Wi-Fi. But if you're like, somewhere that doesn't have a great connection, or you're on your phone, or you're on a train somewhere, your site's almost impossible to use. So one thing that I always recommend doing is doing this network throttling and try it at like a good 3G connection or something like that. And then you can hit refresh on the site and see how long, it'll tell you down here how long it actually takes to load. So like Twitter here, it took almost 4 seconds for just the DOM content to load on a not great connection. And the whole page took 8 seconds. So that's something that's important. There's no silver bullet there like, your page should be under X seconds on a 3G connection, but just try to empathize with your users. Try to, put the throttling on, put responsive mode on, and just see what it would be like, and try to see what you can do. Any wins around that are always good. Cool. So the last kind of things I wanted to cover here is if you have a site with a ton of different assets, like Twitter has a pretty good amount, you can select up here, you can filter like only show me JavaScript or only show me CSS, things like that. And then you can command or control on Windows, click on them, and so you can see like only show me CSS and JavaScript and images, something like that. So that's like a nice way to kind of filter down. There's also, like I showed over here, there's like status and type and initiator. If you right click on these, there's actually a ton more options. I don't use them all that often, but you can like sort by domain, content length, cookies, all these different things. So if you're really looking for something, you're not seeing it on the network tab, I would try right clicking and see if there's anything cool over there. Cool. I think that's kind of what I wanted to cover there. Next is the sources tab. So for those that aren't familiar, the sources tab is basically where Chrome kind of can become your editor. So you'll see basically, let me remove this folder real fast. So basically what you'll see up front is you'll see all the different top level domains where assets are coming from. So when you hit Twitter, you can see that it's like twitter.com, Twimg, syndication, all these things. But if we go to a simpler site like my Mastering Chrome DevTools one over here, and I do a refresh on there, you can see that the only places things are coming from are localhost, Google Font API, and then Google Static Content. So basically what you can do here is you can kind of drill down just like your, in your text editor or something like that. So you can see like the CSS, and you could open style.css, and you can make changes like, background red or something like that, right? And then you can do all these cool things with JavaScript, with CSS, you can edit all this stuff. You can do Command P, and you can get like a fuzzy file sort kind of thing. So you can look for jQuery, hit enter, and open it. So you can do all these really cool things. So one thing that's really neat about it though, like you'll notice real quick, if you make these changes and then you go ahead and you refresh the page, they're gone, which can be kind of frustrating. So one thing that's really neat is that they really encourage you now to serve these assets from the file system, which I love. So the basic idea is you can close out everything, and then you can go into like your Finder in this case for me, and let me go ahead and find the actual project, Mastering Chrome. I think this one's called DevTools. Yep. Okay. So I can find the project here. Where'd you go? and I can actually just drag and drop it over here. And what this will do, first it asks for permission, you have to click allow. But this, now you'll see that we not only have the things that are coming from the server, but we've got this kind of workspace here. This gets a little bit tricky because there's some bugs with it still. Sometimes it's smart enough to figure out what files map to what files, which is really cool. Other times it's not, and you'll have to do it manually by right-clicking on a file and mapping to network resource. So I'll take my CSS and I'll right-click on it and I'll say map to network resource, and I want to map it to the localhost CSS. Okay, cool. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and let me open up a text editor. Let me open up a text editor. Give it 1 second. I'll just close out whatever I was working on. And I'll go ahead and I'll open that same mastering Chrome DevTools folder. Okay, so now I've got Atom open over here with the files on it, and I've also got Chrome open over here with the same files. So we can see in this style.css, the exact same thing we can see in this one. What's cool now that we've mapped them as network resources is if we go back and make a change like background red or something like that, I can hit file command save, and we can pop back into Atom and see that that actually persists to disk now. So all of your CSS and JavaScript changes, like you could do, font size 100 pixels or whatever, you can see that they instantly save back and forth. So you get this really cool relationship where you don't even really need a separate text editor if you're doing front end stuff with JavaScript and CSS. All you really need to do is mess around in Chrome DevTools, and this will work kind of all across the board. So if we go into Elements tab over here and we see this background, come on, and we change it to blue, we can come back over here and see that change persists too. So you get this really cool workflow where you're actually over here, you're messing with the font sizes, and then as you get it, you don't need to copy those changes over anymore. They've already been made. The one caveat here is that these days most people use some kind of transpile or pre-processing step. So if you have a bunch of Sass and Mustache and you're running your JavaScript through Babel, this will be a little bit less useful for you. You won't be able to do that, but I have heard I think Paul Irish giving a talk saying that supporting those things in workspaces seems to be definitely on their roadmap. So really hopeful that soon we'll get at least Sass support, maybe some Mustache support in DevTools, something like that would be great. Another cool thing is at any time you can hit escape on any of these panels and it'll open this little drawer here. There's more choices in Canary than you'll see in Stable. But one of the ones that I really like is you can enable paint flashing under this rendering tab. So what this is going to do is it's basically going to show you in green whenever the screen has to do a repaint. And so what you want is to see not a lot of repaints as you're messing around on your page, because too many repaints can cause what they call screen jank, which is a noticeable jankiness as you're scrolling around. So I have a really good and a not so good example of these that we can run through together real quick. First is this website called koalastothemax.com. It's a cool website. It's like a D3 experiment page. So I hit enable paint flashing, and I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. So we can see as I'm dragging the window around, the whole window needs to repaint. That seems obvious. But then what happens as you hover over this circle is this animation takes place. And so this is a good example of repaints because you can see the whole thing never needs to repaint just because you're animating one small part. Only the stuff that's actually changing repaints. So as you kind of scroll around, you can see in green what's going on here. So this is a really good example because, like I said, you're only seeing repaints over the exact things that actually need to change. And this site's cool because it's called Koalas to the Max because if you hover over enough of these little dudes, then eventually this cute picture of a koala reveals itself, but we don't have time for that right now. So then here's an example of a really cool site. This guy Tobias, and he writes about all this really great web development stuff, and I saw a video where Arrow Twist from Google was kind of reading one of his articles and was able to notice that he felt when he was scrolling around on this page, he felt there was screen jank, and so he opened up his DevTools. And let me make this a little bigger again. He enabled paint flashing, and then he started scrolling around, and sure enough, he could see that this whole screen repaints every single time that he scrolls. And so he was kind of poking around trying to see how you can fix that. And there's a pretty cool API, which is, again, not a silver bullet. But basically what he was able to find is it's this div class menu animation wrapper that's causing the problems. And it's basically this like fixed position thing, which is 100% width and 100% height, and has a really high Z index. So it's like always there, always repainting. So one of the cool things you can do is there's this CSS property called will change. And the basic idea there is it's like a plea from the CSS to the GPU to say, hey, I've got this element, it's going to be changing a ton, can you handle some of the rendering for me? So what you can do is you can do will change and you can do transform. So I put that in there, and now we can immediately see as we're scrolling no more repaints over here. So again, you want to check the browser support for it and see if it actually helps you at all, but it is pretty cool to eliminate screen jank. And I think you could do like very much the same thing. You can see this fixed position carbon ad here repaints pretty often. So I think you could like inspect element on it, find its like, you know, its parent carbon ad container, I guess. Yeah, this is what's fixed. And so then you could do the kind of same thing, will change, transform, and now we can see that doesn't repaint as well. So you can make your site a lot smoother by messing around with those things and finding paint rectangles. Coming back over here, in the sources tab, you can see if you ever have a minified file, like, let me see if I have any in this one. None of these seem to be. I guess we can use Twitter as an example. So if we've got this like, let's see, yeah, okay, so we've got this, dang it, none of these are minified. Here we go. Okay, so we've got this minified file, which can be difficult to work with. So one of the cool things DevTools allows you to do is click here, and you can pretty print any file, JavaScript or CSS, and so you can see it'll space it out all nice and neat for you. It still doesn't help with like if you do any of that uglifying, like changing variables to one-letter variable names. So like here we have like var b and like a and things like that. But if you have source maps or a dev build or anything like that, it'll work with those. So that's great. Another cool thing that's of some use, like earlier we covered the breakpoints. So like you can, the ones that we didn't cover is you can set a breakpoint by clicking on a line number in a JavaScript file. So if this ever gets hit, it'll break there. The ones we did cover were the DOM breakpoints, where you can say like, oh, if any subtree is modified, break here. One other kind of breakpoint that you can do, which I really like, is XHR breakpoints. So I had this one from earlier. I'll remove it. But basically, like, I know that Twitter does a really regular check to the timeline. And I can see that back in the network tab, kind of trying to put it all together here. I'll select just XHR, and I'll wait here for a second. I might have to restart. Cool. All right, so I'll hit just XHR, and I'll refresh. So this should be logging for me every single time the app does any kind of AJAX request, essentially. So it's not going to log all the rest of the stuff in here. Okay, so here we go. So we can see one for trends, one for prompts, one for recommendations. These are probably the things that are loading in on the side here. But now as the page is finished loading, we can see it does these regular calls to timeline. And so where this comes in really useful, just to back up for a second, is like, let's say you have an application where you have one method that you use for all of your AJAX calls. Like you just pipe in a different endpoint to the same method, like you're using jQuery and you have this get. One thing that I've done before is like I'll set a breakpoint in there, and then I'll keep getting breakpoints for the wrong request. Like I'll see one, I'll be like, oh, that's prompts, that's not what I want. Oh, that's recommendations, that's not what I want. There we go, we got timeline. But what you can do, which is pretty cool, is you can set these XHR breakpoints, and so you can say like only do an XHR break when the URL contains, then you can put a word in here like timeline. So we set that and we wait until the next timeline request happens, and then boom, we get this pause in the debugger, and we can go ahead and pretty print, and we can see it's actually on this like, you know, AJAX send request. This is where it gets broken. We can see this whole full call stack, which we can see we have like a clock, and the clock is like a timer, and the timer ticks, calls the callback. You can kind of get a real nice visual of how this happened. Another really cool thing you can do, kind of approaching it from the same end, is you can set conditional breakpoints. So instead of just clicking on a line number, you can right click on it and you can say edit breakpoint, and so it's like only break here if, and then you can put an expression like, true is equal to false, or, whatever. But you could do like data.endpoint is equal to timeline. So you could approach it that way too. These are really nice for things that aren't XHR related, where you're like, hey, only stop here if, count is higher than 12 or something like that. Another great thing, so I've been using this call stack a lot without really explaining it. But basically it's just the entire path the code took to get to where your breakpoint is. But one thing that's really nice is you'll often see apps that have like a bunch of files here. Twitter is not one because it's all custom, but you'll see like library stuff like Lodash or jQuery or things like that. And it kind of clogs up, messes up your view because you're pretty sure whatever bug you're tracking down isn't in jQuery. It's probably in your application code. So what you can do is you can right click on any file and you can black box a script. So I can black box this init script. And then what you'll see is basically, I think we got to give it a second again, but you can see that from now on, it won't highlight those scripts, and it even says up here, this script is black boxed in the debugger. So basically what it's doing is it's going to make it a lot cleaner for you to see call stacks and things like that if you just go ahead and you black box jQuery, you black box Backbone or Lodash, whatever you're using. That's pretty nice, and I think it persists by domain, so it won't black box jQuery from all different websites. I think it might be a little bit tricky because I'm not sure if you black box on localhost, it might persist that localhost black box for all of the different localhost projects that you have. Some other little cool things in the sources panel are, let me pretty print this. You can do multiple cursors, much like you would in like, I don't know, Sublime or something like that. So you can stick cursors kind of all over, and then you can start typing, and you'll see that it makes, that change kind of everywhere. That's pretty cool. And then you can also, there's a mode over here where you can just pause on all exceptions. So this is kind of like, it might be nice, it might not be nice, but you can just let your code run, and anytime JavaScript throws any sort of exception, it'll break here. So you don't have to know where the bug is just to, throw that. So I would check it out. This is not an exception. This is back to my breakpoint, but throw that on for a minute, see if there's any exceptions in your code, and then you can turn it back off. Cool. So I think that's what I wanted to cover for sources. The next, I'm just going to skip to the timeline panel. The timeline is pretty complicated. Between timeline and profiles, I could probably do a whole nother talk on. The basic idea is you go to timeline and actually, let me just turn that breakpoint off before it goes again. You go to timeline and you start capturing, and then you can kind of scroll around and you can do whatever you got to do, and then at any point you can hit stop, and then you get a massive amount of information. Optionally, you can do the screenshots. I've elected not to because we just did them in the network panel. So what I'm looking at here is JavaScript profile, a memory profile, and all about screen paints. So let's do the screen paints first. We kind of talked about it earlier. Painting is expensive and it can make your screen look janky, your app look janky. So Chrome goes ahead now and they give you these little red boxes for areas in the code where they suspect possible page jank. And then there's kind of a lot going on. I'll cover a little bit of it. So you can, like, one cool thing to know is you can scroll in and out to kind of focus on a place here. And when you're scrolling in and out, you can get, like, let's say we wanted to see, where's my graph? Somewhere over here. I guess we'll get to the graph in the, here. Okay, here it is. It's just hidden a little bit. All right, let me cover these two so I can hide them. So this one is just like this summary tab. You can see what your app spends the most time doing. So we can see that just after Twitter loads, most of the time was spent idling, a little bit of scripting, a good amount of rendering and painting, almost no loading, just to kind of give you like an idea of what's going on. You can view that information as like this like bottom up view where you can kind of click into like what was rendering so much, what was painting so much. Also a call tree where you can see like where the renders came from, and then this is like a log of every event that got fired. Cool. So we can kind of go ahead and squish this tab down now. And then this is your memory profiler here. Basically what you want to watch out for is what they call jigsawing, when you see memory going like up and up and up. So this really wouldn't be one to worry about too much because you can see that the JS heap starts going back down. But it might be something to keep an eye on, like is memory growing and growing and growing. And then it separates memory by different types, like the GPU, the JavaScript heap, event listeners, different elements, nodes being created, documents, things like that. So you can not only see if there's a jigsaw, but you can see specifically what looks problematic to give you kind of an idea of what's going on there. All right, now that I've gotten those hidden, we can go back over here so we can find an area that looks janky. Like over here, there's a lot of screen jank. So I'm going to click and drag, and it'll zoom in on that area. So zooming in on this area this is like the closer view of it. So you can kind of see basically what's going on here is you want to watch out for really wide blocks. Long blocks are fine because we can scroll in and see that this is just a call stack. So a function that calls a bunch of other functions is not really a big deal. What we're worried about is things that take up, this is time on the x-axis. So you really want to worry about things that take a ton of time. So if we scroll like all the way out on the site, we can see like, I guess like maybe over here looks like the most expensive thing. The thing that takes the longest. So we can see like this timer was fired, a function was called, an anonymous function. You can start clicking through like that. I'm going to kind of stop here because like I said, I could do a whole day on this stuff. But this is just a basic view of what's going on. One thing I did want to point out is there's this nice trash can button up here which can force garbage collection. So if you're worried about a memory leak, you can kind of play around on the site, force garbage collection, everything should go back to 0. And if it doesn't, you can look a little further because you probably have a problem. Next, I'll do the profiles page. This one is pretty well relates to the timeline. There's basically 2 types of profiles you can do. You can do a JavaScript CPU profile or a memory heap profile. And then this one is multiple heap snapshots over time. So like a CPU profile is pretty simple. You record it. You can do some stuff if you want to. Then you stop it. And it's kind of like what we saw in the timeline view, but basically you get this like top-down view of like what took a long time. So you can see what took a long time itself, and then you can kind of sort this way to see like what had children that took a long time. I find the self-down the most useful. The ones in parentheses here are just things that you kind of can't avoid, like idle time or like actual, program API time. But you can get into things here like, okay, like this anonymous function, F took a really long time, and then you can like kind of go over here and you can click on a file and it'll take you back into the sources tab, and then you can pretty print it again, and you can see obviously this is uglified, so you'd want a developer build, but you can see like something in here is what's taking a really long time on the after the page is loaded. In a very similar vein, you can go to these heap snapshots, and you can just take one, and it loads up a nice little view too, which is like kind of what's taking up memory in your application basically. So you'll see like how objects and arrays and closures and like what's taking up time. Shallow and retained size, I guess I'll get into those just really briefly. Like shallow size is how big the actual thing is. Retained size is how big it is and how big things that it has the only pointers to. So that you'd have to know a little bit about garbage collection, but basically a very tiny object can be the only pointer to a very huge object, which gives it a huge retained size, but a small shallow size. And then you can take multiple snapshots and compare them. You can also do this, record heap allocations over time and see if you have a memory leak. Next, I'll do the console panel. Pretty cool. It's basically just like a JavaScript REPL. So you can console log hello world. I think this is a Twitter thing. Yeah, the console is hidden for some reason. It's like nullcast or something. So if we go on a regular site, like this one here, and we go to console, we can console log hello world. Yeah, that's just a twitter.com thing. So yeah, you can do multi-line code too. Like you could do function foo, and then you can just hit shift enter, console log foo, shift enter, and then end it. And then you can call foo, and it console logs foo. You can also do some cool things interacting between the elements panel. So if you click on something, like I click on nav, and then I click on main content, and I go back into the console, you can do $0, and that'll show you what you have currently selected, which is main content. You can also do $1, and that'll show you what you had previously selected, which is nav. And this isn't, even though it has $, it has nothing to do with jQuery. It's just an API that the Chrome DevTools give you. There's also $_, which shows you the result of the last thing you processed on DevTools. So you can see that I logged nav, and then the result is still nav. So that one's pretty cool. You can do Command K or clear to clear your history. You can, let's see if there's any other really cool things you can do. I guess the last one I wanted to mention is that you don't really ever need to go to the full console drawer, because at any other time you can just hit escape and pop open a console here, and you can do all of your things and then hit escape to hide it again. Some last little things is you might notice that I have, whenever things are moving, I have these rulers show up here, which is kind of nice for design stuff. So you can do that by going to settings, and then at the bottom, show rulers. The console drawer I already covered, timeline stuff. The security tab is pretty cool. Basically, it's just helping you look at a page and see how secure it is. It's pretty simple. It's like, does the page have a SSL certificate, and do all the resources on the page get served over SSL? The Audits tab is really nice. It's basically, for those that are familiar, it's a little bit of a watered down version of Google Pagespeed Insights. But basically you can reload a page and it can do network utilization or web page performance. I do them both together all the time. And it'll kind of point out what things are problematic on your website. I would still recommend, whenever you can, doing the Google Pagespeed Insights, because it's got more stuff there, more of the same stuff. But this is pretty nice. I'll just let the page finish reloading. So you can see, like, it gives you like some suggestions. Red is bad and yellows are warnings. So it's like, hey, your cookies are too big, but that's just a warning. But then it's like, hey, like, none of these have browser caching varied on them. Same thing here, like, it can calculate unused CSS rules. This can be a little bit deceptive, because if you have a single page application, the CSS might not be used yet, but your page is not going to reload and more elements will appear. So I would watch out for this one. You'll see it a lot. Like, I'll probably see it over here on my site. I'll see that same one, because the problem is that I'm using Bootstrap, which is like a ton. Yeah, here we go, like 1,400 unused selectors, and I have a really basic page. So it might be worth looking into. This one here, like, nothing's being gzipped and compressed. So these things are nice. And then if you like see a warning here, like, I have this Node app, it's using Express, nothing's gzipped, but I know that there's like a compression package for Node, so I can just install that and gzip everything. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Resources I haven't really covered. It's basically just so you can see what the website is storing on your computer. So you can see cookies, session storage, local storage, all that stuff. It's kind of cool, worth checking out, looking what different apps leave on your computer. I think that's about it. I think I was a little long-winded on that. I will do some other videos in the future on like timelines and profiles and doing memory analysis, stuff like that. But I just didn't want to get too deep for now. Thanks.